In 1957, the people of Earth looked up and saw something new gliding across the night sky. A tiny silver sphere racing silently over continents and oceans. To some, it was a miracle of science. To others, a symbol of fear. But inside that small satellite was a heartbeat. And that heartbeat would become one of the most haunting symbols of humanity's reach for the stars. Today, we uncover the story of Laika, the stray dog who became the first living creature to orbit Earth, and the sacrifice that made her a legend. The year is 1957. The Cold War divides the world, East against West, ideology against ideology. The Soviet Union and the United States are locked in a race not for land or armies, but for space itself. Just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had shocked the world with Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite ever launched into orbit. It was a simple metal sphere that emitted nothing but beeps, but those beeps echoed louder than any bomb. The message was clear. The Soviets have touched the heavens first. Inside the Kremlin, Premier Nikita Khrushchev wanted more. He wanted something spectacular, something that would show not only Soviet science, but Soviet spirit. And so, within the corridors of the newly formed Soviet space program, a bold and grim idea was born. Long before human astronauts were even considered, animals paved the way. Mice, rabbits, monkeys, all were used to test the limits of life beyond Earth. But in the Soviet Union, scientists turned to a different kind of pioneer. Dogs. Not pampered pets or trained breeds, but strays. They believed stray dogs, hardened by Moscow's freezing streets, would better endure the extreme conditions of spaceflight. Among dozens of canines tested for obedience, endurance, and calmness, one small female mongrel stood out. She was gentle, she was quiet, and she seemed to trust humans, no matter what they asked of her. Her name was Laika, Russian for Barker. She weighed barely 6 kilograms. She had white fur with brown patches and intelligent dark eyes. No one knew where she was born, but she would soon belong to history. Khrushchev's demand was impossible. A new spacecraft carrying a live passenger, ready in less than a month, in time for the 40th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. The engineers, led by chief designer Sergei Korolev, protested. They had barely finished Sputnik 1. A living passenger required life support, oxygen, food, temperature control, and re-entry protection. But there would be no re-entry. Sputnik 2 was never designed to return. There was no heat shield, no parachute, no plan for survival. Still, the scientists obeyed. They had their orders, and the little stray from Moscow would be their passenger. Laika's world became one of tests and confinement. She was trained to sit motionless for hours in a narrow, pressurized capsule, to eat a special gel food, to endure the deafening roar of engines and the crushing force of acceleration. Scientists measured her heartbeat, breathing, and stress. Electrodes were attached to her body. Every movement, every breath was data. To prepare her for the cramped cabin of Sputnik 2, she spent days locked inside increasingly smaller boxes, some barely large enough to turn around in. One of her trainers, Dr. Yelena Kazimirovna, later said, "We all knew Laika would not return, but we loved her. We wanted her to live longer than a few hours. Laika trusted them completely." She licked their hands during training. When her cage was opened, she wagged her tail, unaware of what awaited her above the sky. November 3rd, 1957, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, deep in the Kazakh desert. The countdown began. Below the rocket, engineers hurried through the final checks. Inside the tiny capsule atop the R-7 booster, Laika waited. Heart pounding, sensors recording every beat. The rocket ignited. Flames roared across the steppe. Laika was thrust toward the sky, the first living creature ever to leave Earth's atmosphere. As the boosters separated, telemetry showed her pulse spiking, nearly triple its normal rate. But she was alive. She was in orbit. Around and around the Earth she flew, circling the planet once every 90 minutes. Down below, the world listened as the Soviet Union announced their triumph. A living passenger now orbits the Earth. At first, Soviet radio reported that Laika was calm, even eating her food. But the truth, hidden for decades, was far more tragic. Within hours of launch, the cabin's thermal control system failed. The insulation tore loose during ascent, and the temperature began to climb. Telemetry showed her heart rate soaring, 4 times higher than normal. For several hours, Laika struggled in unbearable heat. And then, her signals stopped. She died of overheating and stress, alone, above a world that cheered her flight. At the time, the Soviet government claimed she had been humanely euthanized after several days in orbit. It wasn't until 2002 that surviving scientists revealed the truth. Laika had perished just a few hours after reaching space. Sputnik 2 remained in orbit for 5 months before burning up in Earth's atmosphere. When it re-entered, Laika's tiny craft became a streak of fire in the sky, a silent echo of the price paid for progress. Her mission, though tragic, changed everything. Laika proved that a living being could survive, at least briefly, in the harsh environment of space. That discovery paved the way for human spaceflight just 4 years later. Yuri Gagarin's historic orbit in 1961 began with the lessons learned from Laika. Her life and death became the foundation of human space exploration. But for many, it also raised an unsettling question. How much are we willing to sacrifice in the name of discovery? Many of Laika's trainers later spoke of their deep regret. They had come to love her, to see her not as equipment, but as a companion. Oleg Gazenko, one of the mission's lead scientists, said before his death, "The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it." We did not learn enough to justify the death of the dog. In the years that followed, attitudes toward animal testing in space began to change. Future missions were designed with recovery systems. When the US launched chimpanzees like Ham and Enos, they returned alive. Laika had made it possible, but she could never return herself. In 2008, half a century after her death, a small monument was unveiled outside Moscow's military research facility. It shows a hand, human, reaching upward with a rocket rising from it. Atop the rocket stands a bronze Laika, gazing toward the stars. Her image has appeared on stamps, murals, and songs around the world, not as a symbol of conquest, but of compassion. Laika's story reminds us that behind every scientific breakthrough are living beings, creatures that trust us, depend on us, and sometimes pay the price for our ambition. When we look up at the night sky today, we see thousands of satellites, space stations, and rockets. But somewhere in that silent expanse, the spirit of one small stray still orbits our conscience. Laika never chose to be a hero. She never knew she was making history. She was just a dog, trusting the hands that fed her, comforted her, and sent her where no living thing had ever gone. Her story is not just about space. It's about humanity, our hunger to explore, our triumphs, and our moral failures. So when we celebrate our achievements among the stars, perhaps we should also remember the small heartbeat that began it all. Because before there was Gagarin, before Apollo, before mankind reached the moon, there was Laika.